NASCAR will make 2 trips to Daytona in the month of August, and that first trip will feature the debut of NASCAR on the Daytona road course. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric, and welcome to Out of the Groove. It's great to see all of you. Hope you all are having a good week. We have an astronomical amount of things to talk about in today's episode, including a couple of things that are pretty exciting. But I want to start today's episode with some good news. As of this morning, Jimmie Johnson has been cleared to return to racing. He will be back behind the wheel of the 48 car this weekend at Kentucky. Welcome news, but I must say fairly surprising news. Remember, Friday afternoon, it was revealed that Jimmie Johnson had been diagnosed with COVID-19 and thus was going to miss the Brickyard 400. It snapped a 663 consecutive Cup Series start streak for Jimmie Johnson. It also caused him to take a hit in the points. He's now 15th on the playoff grid, only 36 points above the cut line. But many fans, including myself, were worried that this could carry over a couple weeks and could affect Kentucky. He might have to miss Kentucky, he might have to miss Texas, also the All-Star race in there. And that would have been a huge hit in the points for Jimmie Johnson. But like I said, this morning he was cleared to return racing. Reportedly, he took a COVID-19 test Monday and another one on Tuesday, and both tests came back negative, so he's COVID-free. Great news all around. Glad Jimmie Johnson was able to overcome this. It sounds like he never really had any major symptoms at all, so great for Jimmie Johnson, great for the sport of NASCAR, great for the 48 team going forward. It does make you wonder a little bit whether or not the test he took last Friday that caused him to miss the Indianapolis race, perhaps that was a false positive. You know, these tests aren't always 100% accurate, which is why NASCAR required him to take 2 tests, more than 24 hours apart to determine once and for all that he was COVID-free. But it makes you wonder if that initial test was actually accurate. We do know that his wife had COVID-19, so I'm sure NASCAR did their research, but man, that's a pretty quick turnaround to go from Friday being diagnosed to 4 days later being cleared of it. Seems a bit surprising, seems very quick, but I mean, good news for Jimmie Johnson, like I said. All right, there was some other big news dropped earlier this afternoon. NASCAR has now officially revealed the rest of the 2020 regular season schedule, the altered 2020 schedule, and there's a few surprises on it. Let's take a look really quick, and then I'm going to dive into this thing in a bit more detail, because there's one thing that's certainly going to catch your attention right away. This is basically the schedule for August, so it starts with a doubleheader for the Cup Series at Michigan. Cup Series will race on Saturday and Sunday with trucks and ARCA. Meanwhile, the Xfinity Series that weekend will still do their standalone race at Road America. But then the following week, all 4 NASCAR Touring Series, and that includes the ARCA Menard Series, will race on the Daytona road course. This is the Daytona International Speedway we were talking about, the big high banks. Those of you who are familiar with IMSA, for example, who race the Rolex 24 at the beginning of every year, it's the same configuration. It's the Daytona Roval. I mean, it's the Daytona road course, but, for lack of a better word, it's the Roval at Daytona. And that track is being used in place of Watkins Glen. The governor of New York did not grant NASCAR clearance to race at Watkins Glen in August, so NASCAR was forced to move from one ISC track, Watkins Glen, to another ISC track, and their really only option close to Charlotte, at least somewhat close to Charlotte if they want to keep it at a road course, was Daytona. Now, NASCAR is planning to run the Daytona road course at the beginning of the 2021 season for the Busch Clash. That was supposed to be kind of like an experimental thing, more or less. But now, the experiment is going to happen in a points-paying race in like a month. So, get ready, y'all. And it's happening in all series. ARCA's racing it, trucks are racing it, Xfinity's racing it, and of course, the Cup Series is racing it. It's going to be insane that weekend. And what I found interesting about this, especially when you look at this from the Cup Series perspective, this year, Cup Series is supposed to run the high horsepower, low downforce package at all the road courses, which means 750 horsepower and a small spoiler. Assuming that remains true, that means we're going to see 750 horsepower on the high banks of Daytona. That has not been seen in a lot. We're used to seeing restrictor plates at Daytona, which restrict the engines to about 400 horsepower. This year it's 550, but they got the huge wicker bills. 750 horsepower. I know, there's a road course involved. There's going to be braking involved, but there are going to be moments. If you look at this configuration, there's some pretty long stretches here where they're on the Daytona Oval, and I can imagine speeds are probably going to get closer, over 200 miles an hour at times. I would not be shocked. I'm just saying, assuming they use this configuration, which is what IMSA uses for the Rolex 24, this is the typical Daytona road course configuration, configuration, I mean, there's some pretty long stretches. I'm thinking through 3 and 4 and onto the oval front stretch there to the start finish. There's going to be some serious speed. My point is we haven't seen 750 horsepower, on Daytona. So that's going to be interesting, at least in my opinion. There are a good number of drivers, especially in the Cup Series field. I'm not so sure about trucks and Xfinity, and especially not ARCA, where there's a lot of younger drivers, a lot less experience in those series. But I know there are a good number of Cup Series guys, like Kyle Busch this year, just in February, raced the Rolex 24 on the Daytona road course. So, I mean, Kyle Busch this year has experience on this racetrack. Just none of these guys have experience at Daytona on the road course in a Cup car, or really in a NASCAR car at all. Remember IROC from like over a decade ago? They raced the Daytona road course, I think a couple of times, once or maybe just once. So there might be a couple drivers that raced in that race. Again, those cars really aren't that similar to current Cup cars, but there's maybe some drivers in the Cup Series today that have at least seen the Daytona road course, but I can't say many drivers in any of those series have a lot of experience on that track, so it's going to be wild. And the fact that it's a points-paying race late in the regular season could lend itself to a wild card winner that could shake up the playoff grid. It's going to be an insane weekend of racing, and per reports, it sounds like Daytona is hoping to have some number of fans in attendance for that race weekend. We'll see if that remains. Things can always change very quickly, as we've seen, but that is going to be a weekend to remember for sure. So that was the big takeaway looking at that schedule. But let's go and look at the rest of the schedule, because after that race at the Daytona road course, it is a busy weekend at Dover. ARCA, Trucks, Xfinity, and Cup are both running double headers. Xfinity and Cup will double it up Saturday and double it up again on Sunday. So it's going to be a very busy weekend of action on NBCSN. And then right after that, NASCAR is heading right back to Daytona to run the traditional oval Super Speedway layout. The Xfinity Series and the Cup Series will race Friday and Saturday. That Saturday night race is the Coke Zero 400, and it will remain the final race of the Cup Series regular season. So there you have it. That is a look at the revised 2020 schedule up until the end of the regular season. Now, the 10-race playoffs have not been announced yet by NASCAR. From the sounds of it, there will be minimal changes, if any, to the 10-race playoffs, so that's good to know. I mentioned how Daytona is hopeful to get some fans at their events. That's a possibility. That comes from Bob Pockrass at Fox Sports, but as for all those other races on that schedule, it is still unknown if any fans will be allowed to attend, and if any, what capacity. All that is still unknown at this moment and is still being worked out by NASCAR and local officials. So keep an eye out for updates regarding your favorite racetrack and whether or not that's going to be possible. Now, this schedule release also confirms a couple other things. Eldora, this year's Eldora race for the trucks has been canceled. Also, the Canadian Tire race that the Truck Series runs has also been canceled for this year. It's unclear at this point if or how NASCAR is going to be able to reschedule those races, or if those two races are just going to end up being canceled from the schedule altogether. Same for the Xfinity Series. Michigan as well as Mid-Ohio have currently been canceled for the Xfinity Series, so we'll see again if those races get rescheduled in some way, but right now it looks like those two series might lose a couple races this year. Tough for Eldora. It sounds like they're still planning to hold a truck race in 2021. That's kind of become a new tradition, but it sucks for Eldora to lose their race this year. It just is the way it is. Saw a couple of reports talking about how a lot of the standalone Xfinity and truck races just don't make a whole lot of financial sense for the teams, for NASCAR, if fans aren't allowed to attend. That's a huge kind of factor when, the Xfinity Series goes off and runs, Mid-Ohio by themselves one weekend, or the trucks with Eldora. That's really an event for the fans to attend in person, and if that's not possible, those races specifically don't make a lot of logistical sense for NASCAR. So those probably are the first ones on the chopping block, it looks like, but that's what this new schedule release kind of hints at right now. But there you have it. One last look really quick at the remaining, basically the August schedule for the rest of the regular season. Going to be a wild sprint to the finish with 2 Daytona races in 2 weeks, with 2 completely different configurations. I saw reports that suggest rain tires will be available for the road course Daytona race, which I think will be insane if that happens. Summer in Florida, likely chance of rain in the afternoon, so keep an eye on that development. That is going to be a wild weekend. That is going to be insane to watch. Fans want more road courses. We'll see if it works out in their benefit. If this turns out to actually be a good race. The Indianapolis road course impressed with the Xfinity Series debut this last weekend, so maybe NASCAR's on a good roll with these rovals, if you will, these new road courses being added to the schedule. We'll see what happens at Daytona, but I've got my calendars marked. That's going to be fantastic next month. All right, we do have more to talk about in this episode. I do want to touch briefly in a moment on the TV ratings, the numbers coming out of Indianapolis this past weekend for the historic NASCAR and IndyCar Cup Series doubleheader. We'll get to that in just a moment. Earlier this week, NASCAR released the top 10 in the All-Star Race fan vote as they currently run. Not too shocking given the recent media buzz and press around Bubba Wallace, but Bubba Wallace is indeed leading the fan vote as of now. Clint Boyer is second, Matt DiBenedetto is third, William Byron fourth, and then Corey LaJoie is in your top 5. You can see the entire top 10 right there. NASCAR doesn't release the exact number of votes, but I have a suspicious feeling that Bubba Wallace is running away with this thing. So the battle might really be for second, which does still matter if you'll recall. Voting, of course, is still open for the next week. The All-Star Race is a week away at Bristol. But remember, if, say, Bubba Wallace wins the fan vote, if he then wins one of the stages in the open race and locks himself in that way, the fan vote will go to the first runner-up in the polls. So being second or even maybe being third on that list could be the difference in you getting in the All-Star Race versus missing out. So while Bubba Wallace looks like he has a pretty secure grip on the fan vote as of now, keep an eye on second and third place especially, because those could turn out to be incredibly important. But I am not surprised in the slightest to see Bubba Wallace leading the fan vote. He revealed yesterday a new individual deal with Beats by Dre, so he's getting some new endorsements, he's getting some attention, he's gotten a ton of media attention, some good, some bad. He's gotten all sorts of media attention the last few weeks. Not surprising at all to see his name at the top of that list. But yeah, let's talk about Indianapolis. Of course, the historic NASCAR Cup Series IndyCar doubleheader with the Xfinity Series being run on the road course as well. All 3 series, all 3 races saw a boost in year-to-year TV numbers. I know TV numbers don't tell the full story, but here are the numbers coming out of Indianapolis for the Brickyard 400 on Sunday, which saw probably the most notable jump, I would say. The Brickyard 400 earned a 2.67 rating and 4.34 million viewers. For reference, last year's race, yeah, it was in September and on a Sunday afternoon, got a 1.9 with 2.97 million viewers. Of course, this was the first year that the Brickyard 400 was run on July 4th weekend, and this year's Brickyard 400 actually got 46% more viewers than last year's July 4th weekend race, the Coke Zero 400 at Daytona. Pretty huge jump, but don't get too excited because last year's Daytona race, if you'll remember, was rained out to Sunday afternoon and was even rain short, and that was the one Justin Haley won. So a 46% boost in the ratings from one year's July 4th race to last year's July 4th race is significant, but I mean, don't read too much into it. Still a solid bump for the Brickyard 400. Hopefully breathed some new life into what was kind of a dying crown jewel race. Of course, no fans were in attendance, and that's really where we've seen, this event lack in recent years. Fans just aren't turning out for the Brickyard 400 these days. It'll be interesting to see if they keep the July 4th weekend date for the Brickyard next year. If fans turn out, if attendance is a bit higher, ratings clearly seem to be there. Be curious to see if the at-track fan participation is there as well. Now, the IndyCar Series and the Xfinity Series both saw bumps as well. The IndyCar Series drew in 1.145 million viewers, and Xfinity drew in 1.69 million viewers. Both of those year-to-year bumps for their comparative races as well. So overall, I think Roger Penske and the team at Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and of course NASCAR, and I'm sure Roger Penske and the people at IndyCar have to be pretty pleased with the numbers coming out of this triple header weekend, this historic weekend for American racing. I think the numbers did what they hoped they would do. I still think NASCAR moving the Brickyard 400 to July 4th weekend and moving the Coke Zero 400 to the end of the regular season is going to be a big win, at least in the near future. I remember last year when people literally laughed at me when I suggested that this was a good idea, and now you see the numbers higher than last year's by a significant margin. I know last year's was rain delayed, but still a significant jump over last year's race and a huge boost compared to last year's Brickyard 400 that was run in September. And let me tell you, at the end of August, when NASCAR goes to Daytona for the Coke Zero 400, let me tell you, ratings are still going to be pretty solid. It's going to be the last regular season race. It's Daytona. People are still going to tune in. I don't think that race is going to take a huge ratings hit. It might not take a ratings hit at all. So all you've really done in this case is boosted up the Brickyard 400, and really at the expense of no one else. So overall, I still think this is a great move. The numbers seem to be backing that up right now, and hopefully people who were laughing at me last year feel a little bit silly. I'm not really the vengeful type. That's okay. It still might not work out. It's still the Brickyard. It was a decent race on Sunday, but I mean, it wasn't a barn burner necessarily. I don't know. Anyway, that's all I've got. Thank you all for watching. I'm super excited because this time next week, I will be in Bristol for the All-Star race. I'm super excited. I'll be doing a video while I'm there showing you guys what it looks like at a NASCAR race during a pandemic. I'll be there, mask and all. It's gonna be a fantastic show. But thank you guys for watching today's episode. Subscribe if you are new. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and of course, a big thank you to my Patreon supporters. I really appreciate the support. I could not keep uploading videos as frequently as I do without the support I get from each and every single one of you every week, every month on Patreon. If you also want to support the show, check out that top link down in the description. I greatly appreciate it. I mentioned Bristol next week. I'll be doing some other videos between now and then. I've got to drive to Tennessee in the next few days, so that's going to be an adventure in and itself, but there'll be plenty to watch between now and then. Thank you all for watching this video. I will see you again very, very soon.